degree, and then Megan will go in some more detail about what you can do with a doctoral degree. So let me start our slides here. So I just have one slide because I've had a very winding career path. It's a lot of information, but I graduated from the University of Scranton, a small liberal arts school, with a degree in humanities. Actually, I majored in Spanish and philosophy. I had no idea what I wanted to do in my undergrad years. I took a lot of different courses. I took language courses, science courses, psychology courses. I just really wanted to be exposed to as much as possible, and really, like I said, had no idea what I wanted to do. So after getting my undergrad degree, I worked in a nonprofit. I actually worked within an immigration nonprofit. And I really found the one-on-one contact with clients meaningful and fulfilling. And I liked that we had, working in a nonprofit, you're always connected with the community, you're always connected with the bigger issues and the bigger picture. And that led me to want to go and get my master's. So I got my master's in clinical mental health counseling, basing that on my experience in the nonprofit and how much I enjoyed working with people one-on-one. And then in my master's program, I was able to get a lot of experience working with kids and families. I really liked learning about human development and like different theories of change. And the natural path after getting my master's in that field was going on to direct clinical work. While I was getting my master's, I realized, like, man, I probably should have gone on to get my doctorate because I really liked the theoretical coursework. But at that point, it felt like my master's degree was not a kind of like a research directed field. I know there's a lot of psychology programs that really prepare you to go on to get your doctorate if that's what your interest is, but my master's was very much focused on clinical work. So I took a job after getting my master's in another nonprofit doing direct clinical work. And at the time, it was a very shaky time. It was shortly after 2008. We're still feeling the repercussions of that, like drastic economic downturn, and nonprofit sector was really, really hurting. I mean, I think it's still challenging to work in the nonprofit world, but at that time there weren't really even full-time jobs available to do clinical work, at least for a recent grad. So I was constantly working in this kind of fee-for-service world and hourly rates. So there wasn't a lot of job stability at the time. And an opportunity, I kind of sort of fell into the research field because an opportunity presented itself for a full-time job working in research. And it was working in a psychology-related research study in cancer research. So that's how I found my way to the research world, and then moved over to a cardiology department, also conducting psychological research. Within that department, I worked on a study of heart failure, and I did assessments assessing for depression, grading the severity of depression in heart failure patients. And that was just a really great, I was there for 5 years. It was a really great orientation to research, gave me an overview of the different regulations involved, consenting, human subjects issues, all sorts of policies. And I just picked up so much there. But after several years there, I really was missing that connection to working with kids, feeling more connected to the community. I was really in a very strict healthcare setting. So I was in a hospital and sort of felt like siloed off a little bit from doing the type of work that I used to do. So I came here to the Autism Institute about 5 years ago, closer to my interests, closer to my original field. And I love the work that we do here. I feel more of a connection with the community. I'm able to still interact with kids through our research studies. And I get the piece that I used to like about feeling connected to the theories and sort of the bigger picture. I think we do a really good job of continually educating our staff and being able to take advantage of different opportunities to connect back to the meaning and purpose of our work. So that's how I found my way into research. Like I said, very winding field, very winding road. And the reason that I share that, especially with the summer scholars, is like just for you to know if you're getting your undergrad and you're not really sure what your next step is. That's completely normal and completely okay. I used to hate when people would tell me that when I was an undergrad, but there's definitely lots of options available to you, and it sort of sorts itself out over time. So Megan, do you want me to continue to drive these slides? Or you want to take over?
You can go ahead.
Okay.
So my path is similar and different to Bridget's, and I feel like the kind of theme that I was picking up on as that you'll hear in mine is that there's this thread of continuously taking opportunities that are presented to you in fields that you're, even a little bit interested in, and then checking in and doing that test of like, am I happy here? Would I be happier doing X, Y, or Z? And I think that is, all a part of the career path. There's so few of us who really like know at 18 years old, when you choose your major in college, what you want to be when you grow up. And so for a lot of us, maybe our driving passion is just kind of like, I want to help people. And then you kind of figure out, look, well, I'm good. For me, it was like, I'm good at data analysis. So maybe epidemiology is a good field for me. So I started at the University of Delaware, and I got my bachelor's in biology. I thought I wanted to be a cancer researcher and be behind the bench. I wanted to be in a wet lab. I want to test drugs and see like what drugs could help cancer patients. And I got into that world, and it was not for me. Like, I knew very quickly on. I was working on Easter. I was working on Friday nights. Like, I had to check on the mice. I had to check on my cells. And it was just like, I'm a really flexible person. And like this sort of commitment to my career is like not for me. And it was also really detached from people. So during my undergrad, I took a biostatistics course, and that introduced me to the field of public health. I ended up meeting with a professor to kind of understand the differences between what someone with a biostatistics degree would do and someone with an epidemiology degree would do. And she kind of explained to me the differences of master's levels and PhD levels of both of those. And it was clear to me that my interest was more in epidemiology. So I applied to a few schools, including Drexel, and ended up coming to Drexel for my master's. I did an MS in epidemiology. So I still was kind of thinking like specialist and scientist, and not the generalist degree, which is the MPH. I was here for 2 years, and at that time, I was working part-time with an injury epidemiologist who was interested in looking at crash risk among teens. And she had this really cool big data set. She was using like crash records and license records and electronic health records to identify young adults and teenagers with ADHD, just using their electronic health records. And I was like, this is the coolest thing. I can help people on this larger scale, because if you don't have to consent, you don't have to pay participants to be in your study, you can have so many more people in your study, and you can really observe effects that you might not be able to see in small sample sizes. And that was like game changing to me. And that started my love of big data. I ended up spending 4 years working full time between my master's and my PhD. That was not the plan. I got into Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and I just loved it there. I had a great mentor. She was a huge advocate for me, really helpful in building my confidence in applying for the PhD program, but there was so much there for me to learn. And I learned a lot about the underpinnings of what needs to happen for research to be successful. So then in the fall of 2019, I applied for my doctorate. I only applied to Drexel. I knew I wanted to come here. I knew I wanted to do autism research, and we obviously have one of the premier autism research institutions in the country. So it was kind of a no-brainer for me. I also have my support network here and aging parents. So that's also, sometimes we have to be realistic and put our families into the equation. I didn't want to be too far from my parents. So yeah, and I started the program in the fall of 2020, which was weird because, the pandemic was going on. But I haven't looked back. So I'm a 3rd-year epidemiology doctoral student, and we'll talk more about my path moving forward. But I wasn't convinced, in 2016 that I would want the traditional academic faculty looking research role. But now that I'm in it, I'm finding that I do want that traditional path. So I'm really excited to co-lead this with Bridget and kind of give you all of your options and just say, here's a sampling of what you can do in research. And take what's important to you and leave what's not, and maybe save this slide deck for a future you when you want to, when you need to reevaluate. So if you're thinking about going on for higher education, I wrote this slide in like the context of like, how did I know I wanted to go get a PhD? Excuse me. So I talked about this. I think I touched on all of these, but my work experience was just telling me that I was going to be a good researcher, that I wasn't, as interested in the administrivia. The IRB protocols, getting data use agreements were part of my job. There was a lot of stuff, and it was all good learning experience, but it wasn't the part of research that I wanted to be a part of. I also have an extreme passion for mentoring the next generation of students. And I think that there's a service component to academia that you have to factor in, because it's expected of you. It's expected to teach for the most part. You're expected to mentor students. You're expected to serve on committees. And so if you don't have that interest, then maybe academia isn't a great fit for you. I'm just generally excited about learning. I, think about taking more classes all of the time, even though I'm done with my dissertation classes. So I knew that being in a learning environment aligns with my interests. I also knew that I had skills that aligned with teaching, and to be a professor at most, to have like a full-time teaching position, you kind of need a PhD in most schools. Also thinking about like the growth mindset. I just like, again, it kind of ties into everything, but I'm just always trying to like better my career. So I was like, why not try the PhD? And if I don't like it, I can always just leave. Like you can do that. It's it's not like a one-way ticket. You can always try it and say, nope, not for me. And okay, what's the worst that happened? You left a job you liked. Maybe you will find another one. And then again, the encouragement from my family and friends was super important to me. And just, I felt, at least at CHOP, the limited career growth opportunities with a master's degree in epidemiology. There was a ladder. There was an end to it. The end was in sight for me already at 26 years old, at least the way that I saw my career going. So I thought the PhD would also give me more opportunities to receive a higher salary and climb the career ladder more too. Next slide, Bridget. Yeah, so I kind of touched on this a little bit. So just kind of for those who are unfamiliar, like when you're doing your doctorate, the culmination of everything is this big dissertation defense. It's your first project on your own as a researcher. Not that you're working, completely siloed, but it's your solo foray into research, which is really cool. And then after I do that in public health, it's really common to go on to do a postdoctoral fellowship, which is usually a 2, maybe 3-year training period where you can kind of work on your next solo project under new mentorship and start to hone those other skills you maybe didn't get during your doctorate. So I'm thinking about teaching more when I do my postdoc. A lot of people write publication, like they publish a whole lot while they're in their postdoc, get grants, and all of that sets you up to then go on these really big job talks at different colleges or universities. And my goal is then to get an assistant professorship position where I can do some teaching and do my research, but in a traditional university academic setting. Next slide. I don't know if we're switching, Bridget. Yeah. You're muted.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, I'm going to switch over now to our other slide deck. Gotta get this one out of the way first.
And if people have questions while Bridget's getting this set up, feel free to pop them in the chat, interrupt us. We're very informal, but we will leave time at the end for just like a general discussion of anything that you're interested in related to what we've talked about or other career advice.
We'll shift gears now. I'm not muted anymore, right? Okay. We'll switch gears now. I want to give kind of a broad overview especially for our summer scholars who haven't maybe been in the research environment for a very long time. just a general overview of the types of roles that are available, either as kind of an interim step if you're looking into getting a PhD. You can take that pause in between to explore whether different industries are a good fit for you. You can take the time to earn some money and save up a little bit. There's definitely a merit in doing that. Or just kind of experiencing adulthood without the burden of school. It can be a really good learning experience, even if you are planning on eventually going back into academia and getting your PhD. So overall, I kind of narrowed it down to 4 general categories of places that conduct research. So academia is obviously the big one that we all think of. We are in academia, we're surrounded by it, always is the first one that springs to mind for me. But healthcare also has a lot of research that they conduct, especially if you have a background in science. A lot of academic medical centers have strong research programs. There is, of course, the pharmaceutical industry. A lot of that is limited by, what they're studying. They're usually studying drugs, they're usually studying devices. So if that's not your area of interest, there are not always as many opportunities there, but there are a surprising number of jobs available to people who have like a master's degree in public health and are interested in getting into sort of a managerial role within the pharmaceutical industry. There's plenty of jobs available, and I have lots of former colleagues who have gone on to do that and made really great careers out of that. There's also, I left off nonprofits here. There definitely are nonprofits that conduct research. So I put that in that 4th category, nonprofits. There's kind of specialized think tanks that are really dedicated to certain issues and will conduct research related to that, and policy institutes as well. And in general, there's a lot of different degrees that can support a career in research. Certainly any level of PhD will get you into research if that's that program has a focus there. But there's also bachelor's and master's degrees that are sort of a more direct line to research as well. Certainly public health is a very common degree here at the Institute. There's lots of people who have bachelor's and master's degrees in public health. Public policy is a natural fit as well, psychology, and really any science or healthcare adjacent career. When I worked in healthcare, there were a lot of positions for nurses who were looking to get out of that field, but certainly basic science as well can lead you to a career in research. In general, the roles in research are related to the different stages that it takes to get. So we have our investigators writing these wonderful grant applications, and a lot of effort goes into that. Usually that's at the PhD level, but there certainly are times when I'm called in, when other staff are called in to help. It's a massive undertaking to put together a full grant, especially something like an NIH proposal. So there's a supportive role there. Then once a grant is funded, you have to take this grant idea and actually operationalize it, put it into an IRB protocol and get approval to conduct it. And that takes a lot of work. I think there's a lot of work that goes into actually implementing, especially any study that involves human subjects and actual contact with participants. You need to look at what supplies are needed. You need to know what measures are going to be used and train any staff that are going to be involved in those. You have to develop your enrollment strategy. Are you going to cold call people? Are you going to community events? Are you pulling from a medical system and you need to go through all the medical records and flag these medical records? Sometimes that involves like writing a code to pull information from the medical record. You need to decide what data collection materials you're going to use. Are there specialized assessments that you need conducted? That would be good for someone with like a psych background to conduct, or in my former job, we had a lot of exercise physiologists because we need to do treadmill tests. You need to make sure that you've really thought through what a research visit is going to look like, what's going to happen when you invite the participant in, and how are you going to make that a positive experience for them, especially if you have more than one visit, you want to keep them coming back. And then you're going to have to decide how you are going to collect the data. If that's a medical record, that involves coding. If it's self-report, you have to develop those forms or purchase them if they're proprietary forms. And then you need to take all that planning that you did and you need to implement it. So enrolling those participants, consenting those participants, that takes a whole level of education to make sure that you're appropriately interacting with them, sharing the right information without overloading them with information. You have to collect the data, enter it, upload it, continue to monitor the study to make sure you're adhering to the protocol. Those IRB, the IRBs has a bunch of sticklers. They want you to report any deviations, anything that could be considered a risk. Certainly, if you're in healthcare research, that's more of a concern. Usually the studies we conduct here are minimal risk. Usually there's not as many interventions that could cause harm, but in healthcare research, sometimes that's a major concern. So you have to keep a close eye on that. And then any follow-up if you're conducting longitudinal studies, which we certainly do here. And then there's the analysis. So it sounds like we have a lot of data people on the call. You could probably all speak to this better than I could, but then you have to analyze the data. A lot of times this will go back to the investigators and those with a PhD, but there are, depending on the research group that you're applying for, sometimes there are rules for those with just a bachelor's or master's level, usually more master's for data, but we can talk about that a little bit. And then you have to disseminate and communicate the findings. So traditionally this happens in peer-reviewed journals. It happens at conferences with posters and abstracts presented. But more and more, there's certainly a push to make, I think with COVID, we saw a lot more interest in how science is conducted and a lot more focus on how it's communicated. And I think it's caused me to realize, I think a lot of people to realize that it's not always done effectively. A lot of times we try to communicate our science through social media or web communications, but it's difficult. It's a certain skill set to be able to communicate technical language in a way that's understandable to the general public without misrepresenting the results, making more or less of them than they really are. And then there's always communicating with participants as well. So I kind of broke these down into two areas. I think if you have a bachelor's degree, oftentimes the first kind of entry point into research is as a research assistant. I would say sometimes research coordinator positions are also available to you if you have a bachelor's. It's kind of splitting hairs what is involved in being a research assistant versus a research coordinator. Usually when I think of a research assistant position, it tends to be more in the psychology field. I often see research coordinator more often used in like a healthcare setting. It usually is more involved with like recruiting participants, but I think the distinction is a little bit fuzzy and unclear. So both of those terms are really good places to start if you're interested in seeking out a role in research. Generally, research coordinators are kind of the main point of contact for study participants. They might help with other aspects of the study as well, like study startup, submitting IRB applications, written communications. It really depends a lot on the field. Sometimes, like I said, there are specialized research assessments. If you have a degree in psychology, that can be really helpful. Or another field if you're in a specific department within a healthcare setting. But like I said, that's a common starting point for those with a bachelor's degree. I think for this role, one of the most important things is just being a very organized person. You have to be very conscientious. There's a lot of rules and regulations about research. You have to keep things really well thought out and organized to be able to manage different participants and manage a lot of different tasks. You would be working with participants, be working with people, so you need an ability to relate to participants, although that's something I think you pick up over time and experience. And you have to be persistent. I included our call schedule from one of our studies here. I think it shows just how much goes into recruiting participants and retaining them. So we have this giant call schedule over 9 weeks. We aim to contact participants 3 times in a week, once in the morning, one time in the evening, one time in the afternoon. We don't always need those contacts, but it just gives you an idea of, this is a single participant and this is a motivated participant. You can see from the note here. But research is something that usually people do as kind of something altruistic. It's an extra thing in their life. So you really have to be there constantly reminding people and be very patient and persistent to have this type of job. And then often if you stay in research long enough, you can kind of move on to more responsibility within a similar role. So it's research project coordinator, I would say, is the role that I have right now. You have a little bit more responsibility, you take more of the lead on projects. You're not necessarily working under people and being directed as much as you are self-directing and really helping to move the projects forward. So you might be more involved in study startup, in budgeting, or in some cases, you might even have the responsibility of leading or managing a team. I would say similar skills are needed, but definitely if you're going to be involved in leading a team, you pick up some skills involved in that. And oftentimes this will require a master's degree, but I have seen people who have just done a really great job, which with a bachelor's degree or a specialized healthcare related degree, move forward really quickly onto this into this role with more responsibility. And then once you've been similarly, like if you've been a research coordinator, or research assistant for a while, you might find that you'd prefer to kind of specialize in one certain area of research. And so regulatory is one area that there are a lot of job opportunities. It's a very kind of niche thing. So if you've ever considered, like, I think maybe at one point I wanted to be a lawyer and you really like that type of thing, regulatory is kind of your way to go. It's like the intersection of science and law. Because there are a lot of regulations and they're very specific and they're kind of, and sometimes they're hard to interpret. There's a lot of times I've had to go to the IRB and say, like, what I see the law, I see the rule, but what does this mean for actual implementation of the studies? So having those experts to go to is really important. And being one of those experts makes you really valuable within an organization. So if regulatory is an area that you're interested in, there's kind of two paths you could take. One is to be sort of a regulatory point person for a research group. So we don't have that here at the Institute. I work within the Modifiable Factors and Autism Research, and it's a really small group. So I do manage all of our IRB protocols, but typically for this to be your role, you have a much larger research group. When I worked in a healthcare setting, we did have a regulatory coordinator for our entire group. They managed so many studies. There were different types of studies. There were industry studies. There were NIH studies, which are federally funded studies. And it also takes a lot of organization. It's a different type of organization, I would say. It's a lot more organization with text and documents and not necessarily with multiple tasks and people. But again, it is very specialized. You might also have to manage and track different regulations like staff trainings, especially those human subject trainings. You might have to help prepare for audits, which is a huge undertaking. And the other kind of path, if you're interested in regulatory, is to actually work for the IRB. We've seen a lot of turnover in our IRB. It's a very specialized role. It's hard to find people to fill those positions. And like I said, this regulatory, having this expertise is very valuable. And that kind of the skills that you would need to be successful in this role, I think you would need really strong written communication skills. Everything's in writing. You need the ability to sort of take large amounts of information, and sometimes it's very scientific or technical information. If you're going to coordinate for a research group, sometimes you need to be able to interpret information from outside of your area of expertise and put it into a structured format, and usually a very abbreviated format. And to be able to meet deadlines is very important when working with the IRB. And you have to be relatively independent. You don't always get a lot of that face-to-face contact working in this role. And you have to be able to absorb and remember sort of specialized information. Obviously, you can always look up federal regulations, but being able to kind of eventually get it and kind of ingrained in your brain is a skill that can come in handy. And then data, that's its own world. And I have to admit that I don't know as much about this world. So like I said, I think there's a lot of people on this call that could probably speak to this better than I can. So I think in research, there's separate but related terms. There's data managers, there's data analysts, and there's statisticians. And I would put them kind of in that order in terms of advancement, although you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. Data managers, I think, do less with analysis. We have data managers on our team that we work with at Hopkins, and really their job is to maintain the data, to clean the data. We have a lot of exchange of data. We have have to clean it for investigators who want to use the data. Occasionally, they will also do analyses on the data, but I think that that is a more specialized role. I would certainly you can learn some of that on the job, but a lot of times we see that more with master's level. And then there's statisticians, and oftentimes this will even require a PhD. So skills needed, obviously the key one is exceptional quantitative skills, good to exceptional. I think that those develop over time as well. I think this is a job where you really have to be interested in what you're doing. Some people are going to love data analysis, but if you don't do it. That's my advice. I think that, gaining a little bit of experience to see if it's something you're interested in is worth it. But I think to specialize in this, it takes a certain person. I do think it takes, similar to regulatory, it takes the ability to work independently, and it's not as people to people centric as some of the other roles within research. But as Megan said, if you're going to go into a PhD role, you might be able to do both at the same time. You get the analysis and you get the mentoring piece. So there's ways to combine it if you are interested in working more with people. And I have this last piece. I'm going to kind of breeze through this because this is, I think, a little bit self-explanatory. I think we're maybe running a little short on time to make sure we have time for questions. But I think this is a little bit rare to find this as a truly specialized area within research, but I think it might be an area that's growing a little bit. I think there's a need for people who can communicate well. I think there's a need for people with a background in sciences who can communicate science well. And there's plenty of opportunities within research, especially if you have kind of a knack for kind of graphic design. If you have some of those visual elements and can make things look visually appealing, that can also help in this role. But if you have really good written communication skills, any sort of visual and artistic talent or graphic design or an interest in learning that type of thing, that can be really useful in a research setting as well. And that's something that you can grow over time into a more specialized field within research as well. Okay, and then Megan, I'll turn it over to you to speak more about opportunities for the doctoral degree.
Yeah, and Bridget, you did a fantastic job covering all of that. And for someone with not a lot of experience interacting with data managers, I thought that was a really comprehensive summary. So yeah, and I made a note to myself too. If people are interested, I did work as a research coordinator and hired research assistants, so I could talk about later my perspective of the difference between those two roles, at least from my healthcare related experience. But what this slide is covering is, say you do want to go on to pursue your PhD, whether or not you want to go into academia, maybe that's still to be determined. There are really three main fields we think of going into with a PhD. And obviously I've talked about academia a little bit, so I want to shine a light on the other two fields a little bit and kind of the pros and cons of working in these, because we kind of touched on them a little bit at the top with Bridget's slides. So one area that a lot of people go into, at least from public health, once you have a PhD, is non-profit or government work. One of the cons, question mark, if you're financially motivated, is these jobs will typically offer a lower salary than you would get from an academic position. They also generally have less work flexibility. So, for example, the projects or the areas of emphasis of the institution that you're working for are kind of predetermined, and you get assigned to work on those projects. So if you work for a nonprofit that's interested in refugee health, you're going to be looking at refugee health. You're not going to be looking at educational experiences of refugees, something like that. But maybe that's okay. They also have limited opportunities for work from home. And more structured hours of 9 to 5. Now, this varies place to place and has changed since the pandemic, absolutely. But all of these three groupings have changed too. And I think that I still see the least flexibility if you work for a nonprofit or definitely the government. The pros of it, I really think the community interaction with these, as Bridget pointed to in her path slide, it's the best if you want to work with the community. You're really working with the community every day. And the government, if you're working from the health side, you're kind of the doctors of the community almost. And that's really the goal of public health research in general. So I do think that passion, that if you're a passionate person and if you have that drive, in that regard, it could be a really great fit for you. I've also heard and did a Google search, and people say that there tends to be less stable employment in these areas. I think it has to do with the way that these organizations are financed. I don't know that personally, but that is what the internet tells me. So I thought I would add that too for just, I don't know, Bridget, do you feel that?
I would say I would consider nonprofit jobs to be less stable, definitely, because you're often reliant on grant funding, and it's in nonprofits, if it's not as here we're reliant on grant funding as well. But it's often different sources of grant funding, and they can be subject to kind of the political whims of the time. And that can be disconcerting and stressful if you're, have to worry constantly about, whether there's going to be funding available to support you. But I think as you get higher up within nonprofits, there's a little bit less of that concern. I have not seen as much instability in government jobs. I've always thought of those as very kind of stable jobs, but it's always relative too.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I know that changes in the government from the public health side is what they choose to focus on and put the, state funds or the national federal funds towards. So you could be working in HIV research one day, and you could be working on Hep C research in a year from now. So like if you're an infectious disease epidemiologist, maybe those two are both of interest to you. But if you want to be a specialist in HIV and then your effort gets diverted to hepatitis, maybe that's not great for you. So just imagine academia is kind of in the middle of these two sectors that I'm going to talk about. The other one that I want to focus or shine a light on is industry. Super broad umbrella term. In public health, we think a lot of pharmaceutical companies as industry, but there's like management corporations, and other like think tanky type places that I would put into industry. So these typically offer the most money, which is extremely attractive. And again, it depends place to place. They seem to have less work flexibility in general than academia, but probably more than the nonprofit or government world. And it just depends whether you're going to interact with the community or not, depending on what part of the industry that world that you go into. So it's not a guarantee if you like working with participants. But generally stable employment. Pharmaceutical companies have some of the highest budgets and pay lines that I've ever seen looking for careers. They don't seem to be going anywhere. And so I think that, if that's your goal, then that's definitely something to consider when thinking about what to do with a PhD if academia is not of interest to you. There's a lot of things that you can do. So that was what I wanted to say on that. Looks like we have just shy of 15 minutes left. Bridget, was there anything you wanted to add before we just open up?
Yeah, well, I did have this last slide here of resources. I had hoped to dig out a few more, but I was having trouble finding links. But especially for our summer scholars, if you haven't already been connected with this resource through your like college career centers, I highly recommend ONET Online. It has so many career resources. You can go in, search for a certain type of position that you might be interested in. It gives you the range of pay overall within the US and also within like a metro area or a state area. It also has what's called an interest profiler. Probably you've taken this in high school. A lot of high school counselors will administer this, and you get the report back, and it tells you like you'll be a great funeral director and then also a great nurse, or like, very random things. But if you haven't taken that in college as an adult, I would recommend going through that. And it gives you, it spits out this code for you, and it tells you your interest areas, and you can browse jobs based on those areas of interest. You can also if you're not interested in taking an assessment like that, you can just go in and browse fields related to healthcare. You can browse fields related to research, and it gives you very detailed breakdowns of the position, the skills needed, the level of education needed. It's really, really a great resource for career planning. And, even job searching to, check if you're being offered a fair salary. for your level of experience in your degree. So I highly recommend checking out that resource. I also put up here links to the American Public Health Association. That seems to be the most common kind of degree in our institute. And then SOCRA, which is the Society of Clinical Research Associates, which will have a lot of information about careers within research, clinical research specifically, but a lot of it translates to other types of research as well. So that's all I have. I think that was the last slide. So I'll stop sharing. And then, yeah, if there's areas that people want to talk about, we can take some time to do that now.
Lauren posted a question. What was the process of getting your first job post undergrad like? I'll start if you don't mind, Bridget. So I went straight for my master's after undergrad. Like I said, had a degree in bio, and I didn't want to work in biology. So I was like, I need to retrain. So I went to master's. And one thing I wanted to add to this was just, I think I joined the master's program really open to where I wanted to do research. Like I was very confident I wanted to be in research, but I didn't know where. And so I took like a very administrative job so that I could kind of keep my ears open to like what people at Drexel and in Philadelphia were doing in the field of public health. And I happened to meet an amazing mentor a couple weeks into my master's program. And she just came to this meeting and she was like fierce and energetic, and she had kids and she meditated and did yoga and she had R01s. And I was like, that's like the biggest grant you can get from the NIH. I was like, that's what I want to do. Like, I want to be a mom and I want to do yoga and I want to get big grants. And so I chose to work with her. I was like, I don't even care what research she's doing. Like, I want to learn from a person that I see myself being in a few years. Yeah, so that to me was like really instrumental to, I needed money, so I had a job, but I kept my research options open to find what was fitting for me. And what was fitting for me at the time was finding a mentor who I could model my career after, regardless of the field. And then while I was under her guidance, I figured out that I wanted to do a PhD and everything. So if you want more details on the process, for me, it was literally just, I went to a talk, she was talking, and I had to go up to her after and say, really enjoyed your talk. Are you hiring right now? I could be a research assistant. I'm doing my master's. She said, yeah, actually I am. Like, send me your information. And I got her card. It was definitely nerve-wracking for sure, but I was like, she was so energetic in her talk. I think I was vibing off of that. And I was able to just run up to her and be like, wow, you're awesome. So yeah, sometimes you just have to, you say yes to things, and like sometimes it just works out. But I did have to interview and got the job, and then I stayed with them for 6 years. So what about you, Bridget?
Yeah, my experience was very different. It could not be more different, I think. So I graduated, you graduate in May, and I had nothing lined up. And so I actually just took kind of like a summer job. And while I was working I was working as like a bank teller, just submitted application after application after application. And I majored in Spanish, so I was sort of like narrowing it down by like different job titles that I thought someone who spoke Spanish might be able to do. I looked a lot at the nonprofits that I sort of had an idea that I wanted to work in a nonprofit. That seemed to be what I wanted to do at the time. And so I just did a whole bunch of job searches on like Indeed or whatever the equivalent site at the time was. And idealist.org is another popular one. And I just put in a lot of applications. And the job that I ended up getting, someone who was familiar with me from high school and could kind of vouch for me, had like flagged my application, and they worked in HR. It was just like a happy coincidence. And I ended up interviewing there. I had multiple interviews, and they were waiting for funding to be able to actually officially hire me. So I think I waited and worked that like summer job for longer than the summer, but not as long as a full year. And after those interviews, I felt really, really good about the job. It seemed really, really interesting to me. It seemed like a really good start. to learn a lot and work in the field at the time I thought I wanted to work in. So I just kind of held out once I had those interviews. I kept putting in applications, but I sort of knew that that's where I wanted to land. So I was kind of patient with them. And luckily for me, it panned out and they did get the grant and they were able to hire me. But yeah, I think that first job, it takes a lot of patience and persistence. And I do think like networking and just letting people know that you're looking, you never know when you might run into someone who knows you or might be able to make a new connection that will kind of help you in your path.
Bridget, did you start as a research assistant? Was that like your title
Oh,
or?
I was gosh, I can't even remember my first title because I think it was some sort of like, it wasn't a project manager, but maybe a project coordinator or something like that. Yeah, it wasn't in research at all. It was actually working in the anti-human trafficking program. It was like a really fascinating program, but very much like a nonprofit.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Any
So that was a long
other?
time ago. I'm sure now that job searching is a little bit different with tech and more technology and connecting through social media, which wasn't really something that was available when I was looking.
Yeah, I would say one thing to do, if I don't know, Bridget, if you're comfortable sharing the slides, but is to write down like the job names that Bridget has shared, like if this is of interest to you going in any research path. Because those are like the key things that you'll want to search. Like preparing for this, I went on the CHOP, that's the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia website, just to see what was listed. And it's like, I don't know, it's bonkers to me because it's just like, I feel like you need a decoder to understand like what these jobs do. And then the job descriptions are like pages long. I will say, as someone who hired people in research, so speaking to like the people joining the field from like having a bachelor's probably, at CHOP, we would typically hire someone with a bachelor's who is interested in a career in research as a research assistant, regardless of your training, regardless of like my study. And there's levels to that. There's like 1, 2, and 3 based on, that's basically how much experience you've had, because you guys have been a part of a summer scholars program like this, or if you've had research experience, a 2 is definitely not out of the question. And I would pursue those opportunities for sure, at least at CHOP. Other places might have distinctions, but don't be afraid of those like years of experience. If you're like kind of just below what they're looking for, having something like a summer scholar, like you were selected amongst all these applicants to be a summer scholar at this premier Autism Research Institute, that's a huge check. That gives you a boost. But yeah, the other thing I would say to people applying from bachelor's is you got to write the cover letter. I don't know how you feel, Bridget, but to me,
100%.
Like that's where I made, because we would get so many resumes that looked really similar. So you telling me why this job was important to you showed me the commitment that I need from a research assistant, the organization, making sure you changed the title of, sending this cover letter to Drexel then to CHOP, and just having that eye for attention for detail was super important. And then the interview, I think the interview is where you get it or you don't really, but I'm screening you. I'm bringing you in for an interview because of your experience and because you told me you really want this job in your cover letter.
Yeah, I agree. And I would say, if you do really know that you want to look into a job in research, I would say, make sure you have someone in the field, take a look at your resume, take a look at your cover letter. I'm happy to give feedback. And I'm sure you could find other people here at the Institute who would be willing to do that too. But I think that there are certain things that, an eye from someone in the field can be really helpful for. But yeah, I agree. I think without a cover letter, the resumes sort of start to all blend together after a while. And yeah, just knowing that there's an actual interest. You were interested enough to write that letter and kind of customize it for the application really, really helps.
Any other questions or specific points we want to go over again? Okay. Well, if anything comes up, I think I can speak for Bridget and say we would be happy to chat with you one-on-one or on the side. I'd be happy to look at any resumes or cover letters. I'm not currently in the position of reviewing these things. It's been a few years, but I did a lot of that for many years. Oh, Rachel, do you have any tips about letters of recommendation? Oof. Bridget, do you have any? I'm writing
Well,
one as we speak. So
I think it depends on who, like what it's for. Like for a job, typically I don't see letters needed so much as just like a reference. So, someone who can vouch for your like level of responsibility, that you're going to kind of show up on time. I think like that's really what, especially if you're just coming out of undergrad, like that's what people want to hear and see. I think for like an academic program, letters of recommendation, you really want someone who knows you well and will like rave about you. But I
yeah,
actually, in a previous job, I would write letters of recommendation for my director because he didn't have the time to write them. So he would sit down and he would tell me like what was great about this person and like how enthusiastic I should be. And he would like, this person's a 5, like use all of the adjectives you can to describe this person. So you want someone who's like that for you. Like you want someone who's going to rave about you. So like, my best tip for letters of recommendation is like make those connections who will rave about you. But if you haven't done that, I think that like you can find those professors or like people who have known you at internships who will speak highly of you, even if you like don't have the extreme personal connection with them, and share your resume with the person writing your letter of recommendation too, because they know what experience they have with you, but it also helps as the letter writer to be able to pad that out a little bit. Because I remember like I've never met this person, but like my director would tell me these are their personal traits. And so I would grab things from their resume and be like, and this demonstrates that personal trait. They volunteered with this. So definitely share your resume with whoever's writing your letter of recommendation. Do you have other tips, Megan?
I would say I would echo everything you say. Sharing the why with the letter with the recommender is incredibly important. It is an unfortunate reality that the people you actually want to write the letter are probably passing it off to other people. So anything you can do to help that is like to help that person who barely knows you or doesn't know you to write it is super important. But yeah, I would echo the like get someone who's a cheerleader about you, like not your mom, but like someone who likes you like your mom does, or whoever that person is in your life. I had a research assistant I hired have a lacrosse coach write a letter of recommendation for her for a research assistant position. And I called her as like a reference, and she just like raved about my colleague for, I don't know. I couldn't get this woman off the phone. Like she just was like, no, you have to hire her. She's the best. And so it worked. Like I was like, oh my gosh, this young woman is so amazing. Her lacrosse coach just like can't stop talking about her and will not let me off the phone. So yeah, I think that's really having that person in your life beyond the letter of recommendation is also really helpful for your career. But to have them serve as a reference for a job or a letter of recommendation for school or both is really, really important.
Yeah. And I would also like speaking to different personality styles, I was always someone who was more reserved. And so like making those connections with, like professors or supervisors didn't come as easily to me. So I had to kind of like look for signs that the people were fans of me, that I, like they might not come right out and say it, but, like there's ways that people will give you like praise, and like you realize that you're doing a good job and that this person sees that is also like a window to ask for a letter of recommendation or a reference that someone has given you positive feedback. They probably think more highly of you than you realize. So I would definitely look for those small signs too, if you haven't gotten to the point where you've made like really strong connections with people where you like feel like you have this lacrosse coach in your corner.
I think that's super important. And I would just say too, if that person is in your life prior to you applying to programs or something, say you're like a year out from applying back to school or applying to jobs, you can email or let them know, like, now that they're a potential recommender for, like, you would love to have them as a recommender in the future. And just kind of that heads up is, like, I think really helpful too. Maybe they can jot down some notes about, things they observed while you were in their class, or things and it'll just help make that letter even better. I've started to do that too with, like, future mentors, just kind of like, hey, I don't know when I'm graduating, but also, like, I really enjoyed your talk, or I enjoyed the research that you do. Can I get coffee with you and just get to know you? Or can I just reach out to you when I'm ready to apply to these things? It feels funny to reach out to people you barely know or don't know without an ask. But I've only received positive, like, response from that. So I think it's working, at least for me. Thanks, Rachel. I'm glad this was informative. We're past 2 o'clock, so I want to let everybody know that they can go whenever they need to. But if you have any questions, like, feel free to reach out to Bridget and I. I think you should have my email address from the Outlook invite. If you don't have Bridget's, you can always contact me and I can connect you to Bridget. But thank you guys for listening and paying attention. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for joining, everybody.
Take care.